Well, while we're waiting for Alex to switch over from viewer to panelist, James, do you and I want to do some quick introductions to keep the flow going?
Sure, pleased to introduce myself. Thank you guys for the opportunity and inviting me to join today's panel. So my name is James Clarke. I do have the pleasure of leading digital marketing and social media for PepsiCo Foods in North America. And that's within our internal agency construct, which we call D3. So I've been with PepsiCo for 7.5 years. I've held a variety of different roles across the organization. Had the pleasure of working across various media types, spanning paid, owned, and earned. So really excited to hopefully contribute a bit of a different angle, as part of today's discussion around acquisition.
Fantastic. And
hey everyone, this is Paolo Pep. I'm Director of Client Strategy here at Data Axle. So my focus is really on supporting brands across various industries, a lot in the financial, CPG, and retail sectors with whatever acquisition and retention challenges they have. So I think we're going to have a fun conversation, kind of getting some different perspectives from James and Alex.
all right. Well, I think what we should start to do is maybe start the conversation, and it looks like Alex will have to kind of catch up once he gets into the panel. So if we want to, we'll just kick off, and he'll jump in when he gets on the panel.
Great. All right. Thanks, Vito.
Yep.
Well, James, since you get to be our extra special panelist this morning, I'm not sure if you listened in on the last session with Fahad and Beth. There were a lot of great conversations around, different channels and different approaches when it comes to acquisition. I feel like from the CPG perspective, your perspective is very different. So I'm curious where your real focus is channel-wise from an acquisition perspective.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I will say in full disclosure, right, there's many different teams operating in a large enterprise like PepsiCo. We collaborate well kind of across the board, but in consideration to that, we do have the luxury of having more of that focused energy in the areas where our specific teams kind of concentrate. So in the case of the team that I lead, right, from an acquisition standpoint, thinking on digital, that's looking at acquiring consumers, primarily through our owned media channels of our brand websites, our CRM program, PepsiCo Tasty Rewards, our website that supports that program, and as well as acquisition on our database and into our email program. And then from an organic social media standpoint, we're thinking about, how can we continue to acquire, consumers to follow our brands with a special focus on those channels where organic reach is still alive and well. So thinking about channels like Twitter, for example, Instagram, and also more emergent kind of social channels like TikTok. So that would be kind of the sense of the playing field in which my team is focusing its energy.
Oh, that makes sense. I mean, you brought up Twitter and TikTok, and Twitter has been a bit of a controversial subject these days. Are you, because of the climate, are you starting to shift your focus away from Twitter in terms of where you're focusing on social?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say it's a great question. I would say, regardless of any sort of developments, in any given particular channel, we have always maintained more of that holistic, approach to management of organic social. And so, I wouldn't say that anything that happens or goings on in one particular channel pushes us to another. It's more so we are constantly firing on all cylinders and trying to, ensure that we're allocating resource to basically exploit every opportunity that presents right across the board. And so it's not so much a case of kind of playing whack-a-mole or realigning resources. It's more so a case of, hey, we're constantly looking to try to promote growth across the board in all ways, shapes, and forms at all times. And so, through that, it allows us to continue to see success in the long run.
No, that makes sense, and seems like a very logical approach, so that you're not jumping around and reacting to what's going on in the marketplace.
Exactly. It's more proactive is
Yeah.
what we aim towards, at least, right? It's never perfect, but the more we can try to be proactive in how we're managing things versus reactive, that just allows us more of that, control, which is so fleeting and hard to come by in a space like organic social.
Yes. Well, it's funny that you said control, because when I think about PepsiCo and all the great brands that fall under the umbrella, social media can be scary for a lot of brands to really dive in. Like when we talk about TikTok, so much is focused on dance challenges and memes and things of that nature. How are you protecting your brand voice, but still engaging in the conversation in a way that feels genuine?
Yeah, great question. And I mean, it's a constant evolution, I would say. It's been fascinating for me as a marketer, right? And I think back to the span of my career, just over 15 years now, kind of in the full-time employment pool. I've had, the luxury of witnessing kind of the birth of organic social back from the earliest days, right? Where I was a college student and Facebook had launched, and it was exclusively open to, the college kids back then. And, entering the workforce, I was at the bleeding edge of then, applying social within kind of a corporate environment, right? And for brand building. So to see kind of how far it's come, over the course of the past, 15 years, it's been remarkable to be a part of that journey. And as much as it's matured in a lot of ways and gained acceptance in a lot of ways, and I would argue it's a lot less scary to folks than it used to be, right? When it first, came onto the scene way back when. It's still, as it continues to evolve and transform, present new challenges and opportunities for us to all kind of learn and humble ourselves, right, as we continue to grow along with the channels. So I would say, what we've tried to do, and continue to focus on is demystifying, and really kind of being kind of that in those internal evangelists for these more emergent channels, right, within the construct of the enterprise. Which is a lot harder than it sounds maybe at surface, but it's really kind of doing the rounds and making sure people are feeling comfortable and understanding of how a platform works, right? And that they have that high confidence in our team's ability to, maybe not wholly eliminate, right? Because if we're wholly eliminating risk, well, then we're probably not, swinging for the fences and being as aggressive as we need to be, right, to stay at the bleeding edge. But at least having that handle on the channels such that we're mitigating things to such a degree that people are feeling comfortable and confident in our ability to lead. And I would say, PepsiCo being a bit more of a mature enterprise, we do have a well-developed system in-house on how to engage various stakeholder groups in a relatively seamless and operationalized fashion, so that we're able to get the input from legal, from our comms team, from various cross-functional stakeholders, while at the same time not gum up the works to such a degree that we can't move quickly and in a relatively agile fashion. So it's the key of striking the balance, but I think, I credit a lot of it down to the strong relationships, right, that my team has built with all of their stakeholder peers to make people feel comfortable and confident in where we are taking the brands.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I imagine there's a lot of folks out there, both in larger enterprises, like in the PepsiCo world, where you have to kind of fight and prove against some of those more traditional channels. But also if you're in a smaller organization and maybe, you're a lean team and you really have to show value in the money that you're spending and the time and effort that you're putting into some of these emergent markets that other folks might not see the value in. do you find yourself, are there any ways that you're able to push the button internally when you're saying, this is really where we need to focus our energies next, and it's something that maybe your peers within Pepsi are not as familiar with and a little bit more hesitant to explore?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, everything is so, we can talk in generalities, right? But everything is so specific to one situation as a marketer, right? In terms of, well, what are you needing to deliver, right? In terms of an agenda for your organization, for the brands you support, and how does your piece of it fit holistically into the broader puzzle, right? That is the outcomes and impact that we're all trying to drive towards. So I would say within kind of the context, if we think about organic social, for example, right, we're very deliberate, at PepsiCo in ensuring that that we have focused energy as an organic social team, and that our eyes are on the prize with the consumer as the North Star in terms of what we're putting out into the world and delivering from a content value exchange standpoint should look and feel very, very different in some ways to what is being deployed in other channels like paid, right, or even owned. Because ultimately, if you think about it, we're activating a consumer pull, right, through that content. Organic social doesn't go anywhere unless it's well received and it's additive to a consumer customer's life. And so the rules of that game are very different and look very different than how they might appear in paid, where again it's push based, and a brand is able to be a little bit more deliberate, contrived, and heavy handed, right, in how it's constructing its advertising messages to really hammer home outcomes like conversion to sales or acquisition, in terms of a sign up message and things of that nature. So I think it's really about being clear on, hey, what are you tasked to deliver within the scope of kind of your role and your team's place within the broader org, and then ensuring that what your team is delivering, that there's clarity on that others are aligned to it, and that it complements the greater whole. If you happen to be sitting within an enterprise, versus competing directly with what others are doing, because that isn't necessarily playing, in my view, to the strengths of the areas that you're tasked to deliver focus energy against. It should be complementary and additive versus directly competitive, in my view.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You briefly mentioned putting the customer as the North Star in terms of your focus. I'm curious, content-wise, organic versus paid, very different approaches. What are you doing from a content perspective to really keep the customer as the focus?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I would say on the digital marketing side, a lot of table stakes things that I'm sure a lot of the attendees watching this are experimenting with at their end in their organizations in terms of testing approaches for personalization of content, leaning into even just the basic hygiene, right, of maintaining discipline around subject line testing and all of kind of the more basic table stakes things that one needs to do to optimize the level of engagement against that content over time. And then I would say, switching gears on the organic social front, the way we ensure kind of maximum resonance there is through a maniacal focus on analytics, right? So it's being deliberate and having an eye to a brand's distinctive kind of character, its persona, and what its objectives are, translating that in such a way that it works for organic social, and that there's enough of a utility and value exchange in the content that we're putting out into the world to elicit that engagement response that we're angling towards. And then through the maniacal focus on the analytics, it's calibrating right as we go, because we can make a hypothesis on something, an educated guess as to what we feel will be resonant. but there's been examples in cases where we haven't seen, you know, the proof in the pudding, right, in terms of the you know, the reaction from, you know, the consumer base. And in those cases, right, if, you know, we don't have that, you know, pulse on performance, we aren't able to be agile and picking up on that, managing those signals, right, and then incorporating those signals to allow us to pivot the strategy or refine our approaches to the content that we're developing until we strike the right nerve, right, and we see those KPIs rebound, in which case then it's, you know, doubling down and you know, incorporating that as part of kind of the overarching content strategy and approach. So it's all very much a fluid exercise, you know, and it's been a great education for me coming, you know, my last role leading more the paid media investment side of things from a comms perspective, and now pivoting over to organic. It's been very humbling, right, and a quick education for me in terms of how fast things change. And yeah, it's crazy. And so it's, you know, it's architecting things in such a way that you have the discipline, the operationalization in place to mitigate risk, but that you have that feedback loop so that you can adjust and pivot in a relatively agile fashion and not lose the momentum, right, that you build over time in cultivating community around the brands that we're managing.
Yeah, very much the test and learn strategy that I think marketers are adding to any channel, right? Whether you're focusing on an email retention program, if it's paid search, if it's organic, it's always being open to the signals that are out there and adapting your approach so that you're really driving home what the customer actually wants, what they're telling you they want.
Like we joke internally, like it's brick to forehead, but I mean, oftentimes, you know, it's these basic principles, right? And, you know, I can almost hear the groans of the attendees on the other end, right? Oh boy, this guy's saying nothing new, but honestly, it's having the discipline, right, to really, you know, deliver right on the basics and ensuring that it's constantly being applied. That's where the magic is, in my view. And that's not as, I don't think, common as one might assume it is. Even though it's common sense, they say it's not so common, right? So applying those brick to forehead principles in a disciplined manner is, you know, how, in my view, you get to remarkability over time.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. It's very easy in any organization to get distracted with all of the noise and lose focus on those basic tenets that we as marketers know we need to focus on. You know, you said something a minute ago that gave me a light bulb. And, you know, when we talk about signals from the customer, what the customer wants, you know, I imagine in the CPG world, you know, first party and zero party data is a slightly different challenge than it is for a more traditional organization. How are you at Pepsi dealing with data, whether it's, you know, I mean, you mentioned the rewards program, the Tasty Rewards. Is that really where you're getting it all, or are you working with like third parties or things of that nature?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, as much as we focus energy, we also cast a wide net. So I would say this is not to the credit of exclusively me or my team, right? There's many teams at PepsiCo that focus on data acquisition and data hygiene and management. But if I kind of take a step back from where I've engaged, right, in my visibility into the efforts, I would say, you know, we're firing again on a number of fronts. You know, we have some first party acquisition, you know, being delivered through, you know, our direct to consumer, either CRM side of things, right, through programs like PepsiCo Tasty Rewards, also through, you know, direct to consumer engagement programs that my brand peers might be leading, right, that are more, you know, I would say time bound, right? So think more like promotions, right, that run for 8 weeks or 6 weeks, but they generate quite a lot of acquisition from a first party data standpoint. Then there's also, you know, D2C in terms of a third type around, our e-commerce, right? It's fledgling, it's nascent, but it's there, it's happening. So that's yet another area where we're able to, harvest a lot of data, directly from consumers through, through our, more of those direct transactions that we're processing. And then outside of that, we have had to, get creative, right? Because we are disintermediated in this vertical by and large, right? From the end consumer, in that, hey, yes, we market to them, we build relationship with them in social, but in terms of acquisition of first party data at scale, I mean, there's really only so much we can do operating independently, even though we're, a massive enterprise, right? With a handful of billion-dollar brands, and so that's where, we've seen great success in partnering on data, right? In terms of engaging in data co-ops. We are a part of a partnership, through Fetch Rewards, whereby, we have partnered with a number of other directly competitive brands, and by banding together, right, through the construct of, more of that impartial third-party entity of a Fetch Rewards, we're able to scale data acquisition to places that none of us as independent enterprises could do unilaterally. So that's also been kind of a huge boon to helping us, regain ground, and be more competitive at, offsetting the deprecation of, some of these third-party sources that we're seeing, take hold in the marketplace.
Yep, the continued game of privacy will never end. Are you finding that you have to adjust your approach as we continue to learn new existing things that we've been doing for years are no longer available? Or are you just keeping true to, this is what we focus on, and therefore those changes in the marketplace don't actually impact our strategy?
Definitely the former. I mean, again, a lot of that's kind of outside of my direct wheelhouse today, just given, the focused energy of my role more on owned and earned. But definitely, still having kind of a foot in the paid world, I can speak, directly to the fact that we have been evolving approaches, right, and fortifying ourselves, against some of kind of those changes in the broader marketplace and environment, so that we can continue to, leverage purchase-based targeting at scale, for example, and incorporate that into our segmentations and maintain addressable audiences, that we can deliver against in paid media here in the US, despite some of these changes that are, forcing us to operate slightly differently in terms of the how, but in terms of the end output of the what, more personalized, targeted marketing, we are still able to deliver that, in the current climate, by adjusting the how.
Yeah, and that's the point, right? It's all about that personalized approach. We heard Tim say in the first session how it's no longer people looking at data as a scary, creepy thing. It's now an expectation from a consumer that you're going to deliver a personalized message. And though the marketplace may be changing, it just means we as marketers have to adjust our approach to continue to deliver that personalized message.
And hey, like, there's gradients of gray there, right? Like, it can get creepy, it can get overbearing. There are lines in the sand, and it's specific to each brand, you know what I mean? And different consumers, different consumer segments and cohorts define what is creepy and overstepping, differently from one another. So our jobs, I feel, as marketers are to continue to edge, right, and deliver towards what this nirvana state of what consumers are asking us for, right, in terms of more personalized, more highly relevant, while also at the same time tempering that with, everyone's level of comfort, and ensuring that we're not overstepping the line. And if we do happen to overstep, that we're quickly correcting and learning, so as not to, to come off in any way as creepy or again, just kind of like overstepping. We want to deliver, utility and positive experience, certainly.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Alex, welcome.
Hey, Alex, welcome.
How are you guys?
Good.
All right.
We've just been, James has been taking us through a lot of great examples around, organic and all the great things that he's doing. Appreciate you joining. I know you had some technical difficulties. We just kind of talked a little bit about data and how we as marketers kind of have to adjust to make sure we're delivering relevant, personalized messaging without that creepy factor.
Yeah.
I know in your work, you're focusing a lot on enrollment for schools and keeping those classrooms full, right? How are you approaching that concept of personalization without the creepy?
Yeah, lightly. We've initiatives to really match advertising with known needs of our consumers, right? Particularly with parents of young children who are looking for care, right? And so, we've taken the approach of helping that match our needs in terms of it's as simple as, instead of just promoting the Goddard school, right? And not just the reasons why you want to join the Goddard school, because it's the fun and the fun learning in a really in a super safe and nurturing environment. It's really around also adding that a layer of like, look, we're enrolling pre-K today, right? Or enrolling pre-K for the fall, right? And just additional messages to really fine tune what we think parents are really looking for, and take a little bit of the friction or a few steps out of the process, right? So if you are someone who has, say, an infant, right? We may not mention that, hey, we've got, if we don't have infant seats, we may not say we have infant seats, or may not say we don't have infant seats. Even if we know you have an infant, we might just simply say, sort of just now enrolling, right? And so that way they can have the conversation. They can continue to have the conversation, because something may open up in the future. But we're really playing around with our messaging and how we, particularly around enrollment, timing, and such. Yeah, I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense.
You don't want the creep. Yeah, the creepy factor. It's always sort of in the back of our minds around how we're not too terribly creepy, and how we got here.
Your child, who is this many months old.
Yeah, exactly. The other part of that is that our ad technology is not ironclad, right? It's a guesstimate at best. So what happens when you get it wrong, right? You're a 2-year-old, like, I'm a 2-year-old, right? It's and so we're careful with it in the sense where we'd like to curate messages as best we can, but in the instances where we have it off, we don't want to really come across as terribly wrong and creepy. Yeah, but that's the other side of creepy, that you know about me, and then the other side of creepy is you really don't know anything about me. Yeah.
And now, why am I going to deal with your brand if you truly don't know who I am?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I'm curious, I imagine school enrollment, it's a longer process to get folks in the door and enrolled. So how do you keep people engaged through that cycle?
A lot from an advertiser. Oh, you guys, am I frozen? You guys?
Nope, we got you.
You're frozen a little bit on my end. I'll keep talking. On our end, from an advertising perspective, we're advertising through the point of initial contact, right? Initial inquiry, initial lead, but we do keep that the relationship alive through email, SMS, on different touch points, whether it's confirming an upcoming tour or an article about parenting and the such. Some of the things that we're finding that work really well are articles like we send out to lapsed or older sort of lead lists, right? Because in our business, it's about obtaining a lead, and but just these touch points that are helpful tips about parenting at various stages in a series can many times often produce really great follow-up leads, if you will, right, and inquiries. from previous inquiries, because people are on a journey of childcare. If you have children, or anyone out there who does have children, you're on a journey, and sometimes it changes. Sometimes you stay with the same with your same care solution the entire time up until grade school, and sometimes that may switch. Situation may change, and keeping really good touch points along the way really helps keep parents engaged and helps keep our funnel alive. Yeah, so it's a really interesting concept. It's absolutely not one and done.
That makes perfect sense, especially unless you're moving or you add an additional child to the home. There's certain of life events that would prompt you to reconsider care. But otherwise, you imagine that you really just got to keep that messaging out there and alive through various channels to keep yourself top of mind. James, is it different in the organic world where, you're trying to keep people engaged with the brand, but not necessarily, you're not trying to get them to buy a specific product every single day? If they do, great.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, is the question more like around kind of managing that life cycle aspect?
Yeah.
Right? You're spot on. I mean, I would say, again, our focused energies around, in organic social is in around, attracting, again, more through that pull base in the content that we're deploying, and having that level of remarkability, the entertainment value, being informative, whatever, that brand specific angle is in terms of how they're contributing to the conversation. And then in terms of nurturing, right, that community, it's more so through the lens of engagement, and that's, future engagement with additional content that we're publishing and promoting through those channels, but then also through community management, right? And it's been, again, a humbling and educating exercise for me, in my transition here from my most recent paid experience to organic, in terms of seeing firsthand the power that community management can have, not only in terms of, on that more individual one-to-one basis, which I was more familiar with from the past, but in channels like TikTok, for example, we've had pieces of community management itself, right, go viral. That if I look at, Doritos, for example, on TikTok, a lot of the acquisition that has occurred on TikTok around Doritos has actually come through as a result of community management versus, we really haven't spent much of anything from a paid standpoint in acquiring followers on TikTok against a brand like Doritos. We've had pieces of community management go viral to the tune of 750,000 likes on one individual specific comment that our community manager has made, to respond to, a mention that someone's put out into the world on TikTok. So it was quite, I at first it's just not something that was necessarily on my radar in the paid world, but seeing it firsthand and the power of what that can deliver in the right channel, like on a TikTok, has been, hugely impressive for me. And my team never ceases to amaze me in terms of the creative ways in that they find to, attract attention organically online.
And just in case there's anyone in the audience who's not familiar, can you just explain a little bit more about what you mean by community management and kind of how your team is dealing with what I would refer to as the haters out there?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's different, to take a step back, right, and think community management holistically, it's like an onion in a sense. There's different layers to community management. So there's, I would say, the most basest layer in terms of consumer response to, direct inquiries, right? So these could be the most basic questions around, where can I find this? Or, I have an issue with my ex, who can help me, right? So there's a bunch of hand raising that's happening, and that's, a lot of that managed by our fantastic client kind of care team, who we partner with hand in glove, in our consumer experience group. The next layer is kind of more that proactive, one-to-one engagement that our community managers on the organic social team would be having, to respond to, direct comments and feedback, again, people are making against our content, or, what they're saying to our pages and handles directly on platforms. And then the third layer, this is the layer that has been crazy for me to kind of scratch the surface on and see my team excel at, is in being a bit more proactive in terms of getting our brand out there and inserting our brands into relevant and appropriate conversations that maybe aren't so directly geared at our brand specifically, but there's an open door for our brands to engage. So what I mean by that is, you could have a case where a celebrity or an influencer or a creator is talking about Doritos, let's say, right? But they're maybe not speaking to our Doritos page or handle directly, right? But the fact that they're talking about Doritos opens a door for us to, then go that extra mile, right? And engage with whatever that piece of content is, or that, that individual, engage them in a bit of banter. And from there, that's where we've seen things, really kind of go haywire organically. So it's about understanding, where do you have the right to inject yourself. We're not necessarily jumping on any and every conversation that's out there. That would be inappropriate. That would run afoul of legal, and that would not fly within our org, nor would we want to do that, because that would look silly, and would position our brands in a poor, unprofessional light. But where there's that open door, definitely encourage, other brands out there to walk through and embrace those opportunities, because there's a lot of magic that can happen in those moments.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, shockingly, this has gone by really quickly. So we're at that Q&A portion. So I'm going to open it up and remind everyone that there is a Q&A object you can click at the bottom of your Zoom if you have any questions for our panelists. We do have one that kind of came up first. Alex, thinking about Goddard schools and, kind of jumping off of community management, I imagine the feedback and some of the conversations that are happening for you can be a little bit dicey. How do you move people off of those platforms into a more one-to-one conversation where they can have kind of a safer dialogue, especially when we're talking about childcare, right? Things that we don't necessarily want out in the open for the world to see.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a little bit outside of my team. We don't handle the community management aspect of that directly. But that's where we have really, really great owners and really great partners that help our owners understand, how to address concerns, especially if it's something that can be perceived as more negative. One of the things we do advise is addressing even the negative publicly, right? Now it depends on how, right? Sometimes things are really. I'm sure there's occasions where you might not want to address everything sort of publicly and move those off platform and address those off platform. But I've seen owners address those very successfully, publicly and resolve parent complaints. Right? I think it's good to see, for the communities to see you active, right? And one of the interesting things is that, and there's a lot of research around it, but we tell schools. We do advise schools across the board because it helps with SEO, it helps with our paid media efficiencies, but to go and to encourage their parents to leave reviews, right? Not say leave positive reviews, but leave reviews, right? Honest reviews, and a number of them. It's better to have a public review of 4.6. Right, with say 100, 120 reviews, than a 5.0 and 6 reviews, right? The recency of them, right? They say that what did they say? They said 90, was it 90? I can't remember the stat now. I think it's 92% of people making a purchase over $200 will review, these self-reported reviews across various platforms, many times across Google. Our product costs a little bit north of our services cost a little bit north of 200. So you can imagine that probably 100%, I'd probably say 110% are checking those because people will check them more than once. And that it's really important to have a healthy dialogue through the reviews, and lots of positive reviews, but a healthy dialogue discussing anything that does happen to come up. Because I know our schools, our philosophy, our schools have nothing but the greatest intent and put forth a really, really, really great product. I mean, it's an 84, 85% NPS. It's really, people are really generally very, very happy with what they get from Goddard schools. But these people should see, what it really is like at the schools. They can make really a most informed choice.
Yeah, I mean, I can echo that too. In my past, where I did a lot in small businesses, reviews have such power. We would see that like 95% of acquisition purely came off of what people were reading in reviews. And it was about getting every single customer asking for that review, good or bad, and then trying to address anything that wasn't great so that you can overall have a good, solid experience out there, but also people get to make an informed decision so that they don't get surprised when they come to you, kind of managing that expectation. It looks like we got a question around strategy. So how will your strategy evolve to reach the right person with the right message with the new privacy laws involving cookies tracking coming to life in 2023? Alex, you want to take a stab at that?
Me, we already kind of touched on this. It's continued focus right around first-party data acquisition, second-party partnership opportunities, and then leveraging third-party data to enrich, first party, and then leveraging that first party, scaling it up via lookalikes and whatever mechanisms and means are continue to be available to inform addressable media targeting at scale.
Yeah, and more this. I mean, I find it everywhere. That's us. I think that's. I mean, you hit it right. The first thing you mentioned, first party data, leveraging your first party data and what you do have, and if you're not collecting enough to leverage what you have and find ways to collect more of that data to help inform your whether it's a media buy or inform your strategies of how you're going to uniquely communicate with your prospective consumer or current consumers, and then finding and experimenting, I'd say. Right, so it's easy to just go out there and say, find the right partner, right? Which I get sometimes even, hey, we need to find the right partner. Like, well, we kind of need to experiment, right? We need to test it out because it's not like there's so much transparency out there that it's really easy to tell that these data partners are better than those data partners. But you really have to experiment and find out what incrementally works better than the next thing.
Maybe certain things work better with some partners than others.
That's right. And then try to eke out the why, right? Try to eke out the why. Why is it better? And then see those things, other things that you can get into that scale, you can scale those even better. And so, it's funny, I was having a discussion of, I used to have a philosophy of 70-20-10 or really, really 60-30-10 of like, let's call it 70-20-10. 70% of what you're doing is your proven BAU. 20% is you are iterating, you're experimenting in iterations, and then 10% like loon shots, right? I'd say it's really, even my BA these days, even the BAU gets tested. Everything gets experimented, right? I think it's just a mode. I think part of that's really good for someone like me who's really takes a scientific approach to marketing, and I think it's really important. One of the most best things that came out of this whole data privacy issues and such is that you got to experiment more, right? You got to. It's going to force us to figure out what has greater impact, and you can't really get at that without experimentation. So yeah.
Well, kind of related to that, we got a question about kind of related to data. In most sessions today, we've talked about knowing your customer better. Do you have personas on your current customers, and how often are you updating them?
For any of us, or
Yeah, whoever wants to take it.
yeah, yes, we do. And I wouldn't say we have a regular cadence. I think it's when we start to, kind of poke around. For us, that can, I've only been with Goddard for the last maybe year and a half, and yeah, we've started to update personas. We think that we're also updating our approach. A lot of things that we're actually doing are so over the past year and a half. There's been a lot of change and updating. So personas, yeah, being one of those. I don't know how often it would change, but I don't think there's a regular cadence that's best practice. But I would simply say, I would think it's when you start to feel that things start to fatigue or may not be working as well. And that's where experimentation, again, to home back to that, I think can help out with understanding when you might need to shift and pivot. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Do I have time to contribute?
Yeah.
I would say, it's interesting from a paid standpoint, we have well-defined segments, right, that tend to be anchored in purchase behavior, right? Because ultimately a lot of our paid activity is calibrated to conversion in some form or fashion. But from an organic standpoint, because, paid is addressable media, right? Organic is non-addressable because we're essentially putting content out into the world, right? And it's our pull, right, to attract acquisition and followership and engagement. And so we do take a similar disciplined approach to audience identification on organic, believe it or not. We directionally kind of reference the paid segments and, who the brand's trying to, attract and speak to. But, a lot of it is, really, it's an art and a science, and more so leaning on the art side of things, the creative art side of things when it comes to, the organic social personas and segments, at least in terms of how my team's approached it, because it's really thinking through the exercise of, hey, who are we creating content for, right? And what distinct groups, can we identify, through that exercise? And what do we feel like would be resonant, in our brand tone of voice to engage with those groups? And then it's about, like Alex said, right, the old test and learn. It's about putting that content, creating it, right, in a deliberate, strategic way, putting it in front of people, and then seeing if it works or not. And if it doesn't work, like, that's okay. No harm, no foul.
Yeah.
Right. We are on the pulse and watching the signals. And if it's not working, well, we just pivot, right, and we move on. And, again, we get better and we improve. And
I love what you said, James, too, because it's a little bit of not reinventing the wheel. Like, if this is a strategy that we're going to try in paid social, why not try it in organic? And maybe that same persona applies, or maybe we learn that it doesn't, and that potentially influences in the opposite direction. Like, it's all, as long as you're testing and learning the whole way through, it can be a fluid motion. We got another.
I mean, sometimes I will say, just to put a capstone on that, we will get we'll work, it's very fluid, right? We'll work with our brand partners and we'll test sometimes messaging territories in organic because they want to, get a litmus for, how people react to them, and then apply that understanding in kind of a paid or broader kind of strategic context, which is fascinating. So it becomes almost like a real life learning lab.
You're the guinea pig for the organization.
You're in the coal mine.
Well, it's funny that
try it in social.
Yeah, right. Let's see what happens. Let's see how the market's reacting to it.
I mean, it's low risk as long as we're putting the messaging. Right, we're not doing anything that's out of character with the brand or crossing any guardrail lines.
Offering free promos that people didn't offer us. Well, it's funny that perfectly segues to the next question we got from the audience. Social is such a wild card. How do you create guardrails in terms of how you respond so things don't go awry? I feel like in the US, we're so polarized that it sometimes paralyzes how you approach this. What do you think, James?
I mean, I think definitely a foundation is, in terms of hiring the right people, right? Training those people well and providing a support system around them. In terms of, some of the checks and balances, right? I mentioned previously in terms of legal and comms and operationalizing that in a way that works for everyone, but that doesn't gum up the system, right? So finding that balance. But I think as well, just again, some of the most basic common sense things that, we've all been kind of taught since we were kids in terms of, there are certain topics and subjects, right, that, as per a dinner conversation, what do they say? Like, there's certain topics you don't want to bring up, right, in front of strangers at the dinner table, because they tend to be more polarized and can be a challenging, situation to talk through and work through. So, in terms of, I'd say that's by and large how we, mitigate and approach that on the whole. And then, of course, there are certain conversations that brands are being very deliberate about taking a position on, right? And that's hugely empowering too, right? So it's not to say, I don't think, the message, I don't want the audience to think, well, we just walk the middle on everything and it's beautiful wallpaper and we live in our little bubbles, right? I think there are times and places where brands do want to be deliberate in taking certain stances but they have to knowingly be doing the calculus, right? On understanding, well, you're walking into that, right? And you're taking that position, very deliberately, and, you're prepared, right, as an organization, to, lean in on that position and you will kind of stay that course and commit, right? Not only in your words, but also in your actions. And so we have a number of brands that, are quite active in, more polarized topics and, areas of society. And that works well because we have the full support of the organization behind those efforts, and we're all galvanized and marching in that same direction, right? But what you don't want to do is, I don't think, blunder into some of those spaces and places, because that's just a precarious position to put yourself and your team in, especially, and it doesn't, do anything to support or drive, the KPIs and objectives of your brands or business.
Yeah, I think it relates back to knowing your customer, right? So if you are either through personas or first-party data, however you get to know your customer best, which topics you can and can't jump into, or just a little bit more of where your customer is going to find something that resonates and appreciate your brand weighing into the conversation versus adding feedback that isn't requested.
Yeah, I gotta imagine, again, outside of my thankfully, outside of my area expertise or remit, because it can get sticky. But I've got to imagine it just comes from a deep understanding of your brand, right, and who your brand is to your customer, right. And so it means that whether or not you have the right, you have the or the clout, if you will, to be in the conversation or not, right, or to ignore it. Yeah. Because there's certain times where I'm pretty sure your customers would expect you to speak up and expect you to have an opinion and not walk the line. And other times, depending on what your brand is, they might want you to be very quiet. Politely quiet. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, actually, guys, we went over, so I just wanted to thank both of you for answering so many of these great questions we got from the audience. I appreciate all your time today, and I'll hand it back to Vito.